Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders, 2025 Regional Edward R. Murrow Award winner for Best Podcast. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee. Sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
We want to put a warning off the top of today's episode. We're discussing New Mexico's problems with child abuse, and with that, there may be some themes and details here that for some are going to be upsetting to hear.
Yeah, New Mexico continues to face incredibly tragic stories of child abuse. Chris, we've been reporting in Albuquerque since 2013, and I know both of us have done stories about different cases involving children that really just stick with you, from 9-year-old Omari Varela to 10-year-old Victoria Martins. Those are just two high-profile cases of children that we've both covered. And unfortunately, there are more cases that our colleagues here at KRQE have reported on where red flags were there, the state system in place to intervene had warnings, had touch points with families, and yet a child still died.
Yeah, and one of the most consistently raised topics in our reporting is whether some of the deaths could have been prevented through state intervention, specifically those with the department in charge of child welfare, which is better known as CYFD, the Children, Youth, and Families Department.
So let's bring in our guest here today, someone who spent a lot of time covering this difficult topic, including a recent story that's getting a lot of attention, both online and from lawmakers. KRQE News 13 Anchor-Reporter Jessica Garate joins us again. Jessica, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris and Gabby, and thank you for shining more light on this issue in our state by bringing this topic on your podcast today.
Yeah, you're welcome. And again, you know, we see your reporting is very entrenched in this issue. As Gabby mentioned, you covered a significant number of these stories about child abuse and neglect and CYFD's varying roles in those cases. Just tell us about some of the stories you've covered and why, and what's really driven you to do that work. Why has this been a topic you've really gotten into?
It's been just really heartbreaking. We're all parents, and you just see these children in different situations where you're like, what happened? How did they not get the care they need? How did everyone voice concern and we still left them in this dangerous situation? And so I've spent so long, and I can just think of Omari Varela, where we had 911 calls that were just horrifying, where you're hearing, he calls 911 in the back seat of a car, and you're just hearing his parents berate him and say, no one loves you, no one wants you, I don't like being your parents. And that kind of stuff just brings just this horrible heartache, and trying to bring justice for those children. And, you know, this is a 9-year-old, that's all he's hearing. And then the Victoria Martins, that one was just awful. And I just remember that one brought me to tears, because the criminal complaint didn't come down until after our 10 o'clock news. So I had it after our news. I went home and I'm just sitting there in bed reading it. And it was just, the details were horrific. And again, you're just trying to piece together, like, how did we get here? The James Dunkley, that one's been another one where I got involved with that one because I just happened to be working one evening and his grandfather called. And is like, I kept telling the state, please do not put my grandson back. He was doing well. He came to my home and he was filthy and hadn't, he was starving. And so I got him to a good place. And again, here we are, and he dies. He gets put back in. And then, of course, the latest with the Silver City case with Zachy Bynum, which was another one where I had a grandmother calling me saying, I tried everything to get help.
It seems like, well, for a lot of people, this type of news is just really hard to hear when you talk about children being abused to the point of, their death, which is just horrible for any of us to take in as reality here in New Mexico. But it seems like, for those of the journalists who do this kind of reporting, it seems like you often get calls again of, from the community members or people kind of at their wit's end with the system, it seems like.
And it's really taken a team of us to expose these kind of stories, because there's so much secrecy involved in this, where CYFD says, hey, we can't share those records. Every time I just do the courtesy call, I'm like, I know you can't comment, but hey, I'm doing this story on this death case, or can you send me a statement? Can you do this? But it really took a team of me working with family members, calling me, and attorneys. representing wrongful death lawsuits, because some of us would get records, some of us wouldn't. We'd share them, and it really took, a team of us working with attorneys who wanted to go on camera and say, hey, look, this is what we discovered, and me sharing what I had discovered as well. And so that's kind of how those stories got exposed finally.
Yeah, I think we should also qualify where CYFD is today. Essentially, this is a state agency facing continued criticism across the board for its failure to act to protect children. In February of 2023, the governor signed an executive order targeting the department and said, quote,
"The number one priority of that department is protecting children and improving their well-being." That is not what is occurring in the state of New Mexico in the way that either the secretary or I want.
That was the governor in 2023. Fast forward today, the lawsuit that you reported on recently alleges CYFD's failure to protect a 5-year-old girl from her drug-addicted parents near Silver City. 5-year-old Zachy Bynum died of carbon monoxide poisoning on the floor of a filthy shack with no heat, no running water in Grant County. But that's just the start of it, right? Tell us first just a little more background of her family. It sounds like CYFD had a series of interactions with the family before she died again, right?
It was just unbelievable. I mean, 5 different times. And what really stands out is what kind of calls they were getting and who were making these calls, and had major concern. We had, first of all, a sheriff's deputy calling saying, hey, I found the little boy in the back, sleeping in the back of a pickup by himself. He was 5 at the time. This is Zachy's brother, in a Walmart parking lot. Couldn't find the parents. So call CYFD. CYFD doesn't go to check where they're staying, doesn't, that's it. And I mean, this is just over and over, repeat calls to CYFD and repeat chances for them to at least go and see where they are living. And the saddest for me was that you had school personnel calling twice, 2 different times, that they had, and CYFD went and met with the staff at the kids' school who told them, hey, they come in so filthy, they're getting picked on. And we know there's no running water. A teacher was sending food home with them because she was so concerned that they weren't getting any food during the weekend. And so this was, a whole community raising all these red flags. And it didn't take until it was the 4th call, the 4th investigation into the family, that a CYFD worker actually went to the house to see what conditions they were living in. And we've all seen the video where the conditions are just horrific. And you don't have running water, you don't have any heat.
And can you spell out, for those who have not seen the video and those listening audio only, what do you see in that video?
It is just awful. We know that there was a history of domestic violence, so a lot of things are broken. There's trash everywhere. The entire property is just filthy. And
you couldn't see the floor in the home is what stuck out to me.
There's food. There's, the kids are sleeping on the ground. There's just, everything's broken. It's just a 1-room, basically a little shack is what the police and deputies had called it.
Yeah, it's clearly a really terrible place that I don't think that there's many people out there that would say that they would think that that's normal. There's clearly something else going on there when you see the conditions.
And just the red flags of even, in looking at CYFD policies and standards, just because you live in a filthy home is not reason enough to take the child out. But on top of them knowing that they're burning coal and had carbon monoxide poisoning before, that should be,
and had no running water.
And these kids weren't going to school. You could clearly tell that they had been neglected. And they had a lot of absences. They had a lot of, they weren't going to school. And just all of that combined should have raised a lot of flags.
And red
flags.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We should note that the story that you put together, we have on KRQE.com. It's about a 7-minute piece, comprehensive into all of those interactions that took place before this girl's death. And we will put a link to that in our show notes here.
And I rarely do that that's a very long story for me to tell, probably one of the longest in my career, but we really wanted to spell out each time that CYFD, our state, what interaction, and spell that out, because this is pretty rare for us to start seeing a full picture. And the way that we got these documents and the video was we had a web producer who was really curious and like, what happened? We knew a kid, CYFD's not going to tell us anything. And we're like, this kid, she's like, there was this kid and she was found underneath her parents and she had been dead for a while, but we don't know why. And we couldn't figure out. And so we put in a records request, and the sheriff's department down there gave us everything, which doesn't usually happen. I mean, we rarely see that kind of access to those records. And that's how we were able to really kind of spell out.
Yeah. And as a component of the story, you spoke to attorney Sarah Krecka for this, who is representing the family on this wrongful death lawsuit against CYFD. She is a familiar name. This is not the first time that she's worked on a case similar to this involving, issues with CYFD. In this case, though, what did you learn from that interview? What went wrong, according to the attorney?
And she we've done a couple of stories together with Sarah Krecka. She actually had one of the largest settlement in a wrongful death child abuse case, which was the James Dunkley case. And so she's taken on this case, but she's just saying, there was very, the way they investigated each case, like no one going and checking and taking the word of these parents who are drug addicts and they're saying, hey, we're clean. Hey, we're not doing drugs anymore. Hey, we're living with grandma where there is running water, and these kids, and CYFD not checking and just taking their word for it. So then what happens is you have this first case, this first investigation, and they're like, okay, well, they're getting help. They shut, that case is closed. Then they go on to the next one and don't bother going to the home again to see how these kids are living. And so then it's like, okay, now we've got a second failure where they could have gone and seen what kind of conditions. And so it was kind of just this mix. And you have a ton of caseworkers working, different caseworkers. So that causes an issue.
It's not one person consistently.
And so you have, you even had supervisors that were just signing off on things saying, okay, mom says that they don't do drugs anymore. Check. Mom says that they're living with grandma. Check. Like not checking on any of this. And you had that happen over and over. And it was finally one CYFD worker who did go, but all she did was she said, okay, make sure you clean up this place, and never checked to see if they did. Wow. And never checked back again. So
yeah, and Sarah Krecka, the attorney, was able to get those kind of documentation about the CYFD visits.
Yes, and she was able to just get the records that could kind of detail, and a lot of it comes from law enforcement calls to CYFD, so we can get kind of an idea of how many times they were called. And I was able to get some through public records, which I had never obtained in 2 decades of reporting on CYFD. But for some reason in Silver City, they released them to us. And so I was able to see the calls, some of the calls that had been made, including school and police.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Logan Rader, host of New Mexico Living. New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
If you like New Mexico News Insiders, learn more about New Mexico in Focus, a weekly hour-long show analyzing decisions impacting New Mexico statewide. Stream it anytime, anywhere. Visit nmpbs.org and follow them on all social media platforms.
Now back to New Mexico News Insiders.
There's another component here to the death of Zachy Bynum that you mentioned at the end of your story, specifically alleged retaliation against the grandmother of Bynum and her brother. Can you explain more about this? What happened when the grandmother tried to advocate for taking care of her own grandson after his sister died?
So the way this all unfolded was I aired our first story after we'd gotten the first records just showing when the parents were charged. The grandmother reached out to me and said, hey, she's like, I was doing everything possible to get these kids help. I moved from California because I knew that my daughter was in a bad situation, and I wanted her out of there because she's in a domestic violence. She wasn't in a good situation. I knew these kids weren't getting the help they needed. She kept calling CYFD, kept asking. She was calling every state official down there trying to get some help for these kids. And the weekend that Zachy died, she actually had to go back to California because she had a death in her family and had to go to a funeral. So she was checking on them. She'd asked the mom, hey, can I please take them, get them showered, get them cleaned up. So after the death of Zachy, she gets her grandson into her care. And so she's like, he was in just awful shape. Like he had a lot of rotting teeth because he couldn't brush his teeth. So she got him help with his teeth. She got him into karate. She got him into going to school. She threw a birthday party and had the neighbor kids come. So he finally had this like sense of a normal life. And CYFD comes to her and says, hey, we're working to reunify this little boy back with the parents who are currently facing charges. They have child abuse resulting in death charges facing them. They're probably going to go, if they get convicted, they're going off to prison. So the grandmother's like, hey, I don't think, and she's like, I'm like, were you combative? She's like, no, I went to them like, please do not do that to me because they've already showed that they're not capable of raising children. And I've already lost one grandkid. Please don't let me lose another.
And he's 7 at the time. She's like, look, he's having a healthy life. I've got him in karate. I've got him doing different things. He's got friends. He's doing well in school. You know, I'm doing everything I can. And I'm the only, and grandma's the only one that's known this kid since birth. So because she did that, CYFD, and I've got the letter showing it, like you're trying to block reunification with these parents. And so CYFD took the little boy from her and put him into foster care. So now he's not only seen his 5-year-old sister die in front of him, his best friend that he's only, that's one of the closest friends he's only had. And he gets put with grandma, who's giving him a normal life. And now they're removing him again and putting him in foster care. And he's still there to this day. And she's been fighting for custody. And because she did a story with us, I interviewed her attorney. And because we did that, they put a gag order. So I no longer have any access. The judge put a gag order. So I don't know what's going to end up in the custodial case. I'm following the criminal case, but the custodial case I no longer have access to.
Is some of the custodial decision-making happening there because of the nature of, well, they're innocent until proven guilty?
Some of that. And I think what I've done so much research on, like, how did we get here? Mm-hmm. And why is our state so adamant about putting these children back with these parents? And it was the stuff that I've seen. And of course, just doing some research and it could be different things adding up to where we are right now. Mm-hmm. But there was a great CBS Sunday morning story a couple of years ago, and it showed we had gone the whole opposite direction in our nation, where we were taking kids out for everything. Filthy home, filthy, and it had this one mom who had like a lapse in judgment in New York, and they took her kid away, and she did everything she could to get her kid back, couldn't get her kid back. They felt that it was impacting more minority families, that they were just getting their kids taken and thrown into foster and parents couldn't get them back. So then we shifted to this whole other side where it was like everything possible. All these studies show that the best things for these kids are to be with their parents. And so this is kind of why they're saying, hey, we need to put him back with his parents. And I asked the attorneys, I'm like, what happens when the parents get sent off to prison if they're convicted in this case? And they're like, well, then they'll probably end up back in foster care again.
Golly,
but in
the
meantime,
trauma to the kid. And Ann Perrette has also done stories about this where it's like, this is clearly an issue where they're trying to reunify children with their alleged abusers in this mm-hmm. case. And we all know that the child died, in the home with the parents, but they still have to go through the whole due process and the court system before they are convicted in that death. So that seems like a problem of keeping the siblings with these parents who have already proven to be a problem, an unsafe environment for the children in their home.
And if you raise concerns about it, then they retaliate against you. And this isn't the only case. Like we've done stories with Anne, Sarah Krecka, the attorney, also mentioned several other. This was just how CYFD would, if you tried to block putting those kids back with those parents, then they would retaliate against them. And I have the actual letter that was sent to her saying this, like saying, you're blocking it. Wow. We're taking him away.
It just reminds me when you said we've swung in the other direction. This is one thing we've heard with our behavioral health system too, right? Mm-hmm. With mental mm-hmm. health patients, we used to send them to the psychiatric wards, and often, that was an issue of civil rights violations. And now it seems like a lot of people are raising the alarm that we've moved the opposite direction. Mm-hmm. And now we have, a lot more people on the streets that maybe should be in a hospital.
And that's one of those things where I think in both situations, in both of these problems that we're facing, that we just come back to a middle ground where we say, okay, let's look at all the different things that have been happening, and is there a chance that something like this could happen? And are we checking on them? And are we making sure that these kids are no longer in it, even if they stay with the parents, that they're in a better place and they're not in danger?
We obviously got a little bit of a background about how CYFD has responded to this, but obviously there's also the question you ask as a journalist on the record, how do they respond to this particular case with Zachy Bynum? We know typically the government is tight-lipped, saying things like, due to pending litigation, we have no comment, but in this case, have you heard anything from CYFD about this case at all?
No, and that's always been the issue, because they cite our children's code, and they say that under that there's privacy issues where we can't discuss anything. The only time I've been able to shed light on these types of stories is unfortunately when the child dies. And what happens is they do a full investigation on how many times and what happened to the child that CYFD was involved. And because they do that, they write up a report. Getting that report is also a massive challenge, because, like, for instance, the James Dunkley death, I knew they were writing a report so I could see how many times CYFD was involved and called. But then I have to wait until that report's done. And so I can't put in a request if nothing's there. So every single week I would call CYFD for a year until that report was done, and then I could put in a records request to get the documents showing what kind of involvement CYFD did. That's the kind of issues we face, and that's what, and I want to be fair to CYFD. I really do. I want them to be able to say, hey, the cases we had, they weren't, tell us what kind of involvement you had and why you didn't do more, and they may have a valid reason, and they may, this is why, and we were following policies, but I can't get those answers, and even records. The James Dunkley case, I'm barely getting lapel videos, and this has been 4 years since I've asked for those records, and now it doesn't do any good. I mean, the case has been adjudicated. Everyone that was involved in his death have been punished, and the civil case has been adjudicated, so there's settled, so there's nothing left really for.
It's so frustrating. The James Dunkley case, let's just touch on that a little bit. You reported on that. He was in, this is the death of James Dunkley Cruz in 2019. He was 4 years old when he was beaten to death by his mother's roommate. In that case, your reporting showed this boy had suffered clear signs of abuse while he was in his mother's care. We've been here before. Again, we're learning that these cases, it seems like CYFD gets involved or gets called, and then they try to keep the kids back with their parents. Is it your impression that the state's mission now is to reunify still, keep kids with their parents despite some of these warning signs?
I still think, in the Dunkley case was, more than 4 years ago, and that was really, I mean, you've got a little boy, it was just heartbreaking. You've got a little boy saying not only is he being physically abused, sexually abused, and two different men. I mean, he was just awful. And he told authorities this, and CYFD that day knew that was happening and still kept him with mom. It still has been this philosophy. I do think for the first time, our legislature is starting to say, hey, it's time for us to do something. And I thought Senator Cervantes this year in one of the committee's hearings I was watching, and they were really just hammering CYFD and the secretary and just going after her. And part of it was, he said, we for year after year after year, you've come in here and have told me these sob stories about your workers and how hard it is to recruit and how tough a job it is and that they're doing their best. And he's like, and I believed it. He's like, but now I'm seeing this case. I mean, and he teared up and during the hearing and was like, hey, have you seen this Silver City case? Like and he's like, enough's enough. And for him to say that, where he's always protected CYFD, and them trying to find different ways. So now they have like an ombudsman who's going to be advocating for children, which I think is going to help. And I think we are going to start seeing a lot more action from lawmakers. A lot of it is because we can see video now. Mm-hmm. And now it's just when you start seeing that and seeing powerful. What more powerful, and I think it grabs our attention. We've had, that we know of, 6 children die under CYFD care since the beginning of this year.
Wow.
which is just unbelievable.
We'll be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Monica Wicki, host of New Mexico Living. This episode of New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS. If you enjoy New Mexico News Insiders, check out New Mexico in Focus, a great source for insights about what's happening in our state. Catch their podcast and videos at nmpbs.org or stream it anytime, anywhere on the free PBS app. Now, let's continue to New Mexico News Insiders.
And maybe it's something like you mentioned, Silver City, Sheriff's Department handing you that lapel video. That's rare. Usually, they, law enforcement and the state and government would hide behind the Children's Code and say, like, per the Children's Code, we can't give you these records. But maybe it's something law enforcement is also noticing is a powerful tool, right, for people to see the kind of environment that these kids are in. I want to also mention that last month, the governor announced a plan for not sending babies home with their parents right away when they're born with drugs in their system. We reported on this recently, and it was a little bit controversially received, but the governor said, quote,
We really lean into family reunification. There is too much risk here. Babies do not go home. That's the bottom line.
So do you see this as helping to solve some of the issues in the cases that you've been reporting on?
Yes. It's still very early. It just went into effect. And one of them, and I'm still trying to get to the bottom of it. We just had a case last week where a little girl was born addicted. They put her back a year later with parents, and then she dies within 30 days of her being put back in the care of the mom, is now facing charges. I do think that has been like a whole nother separate issues with these babies, where it was just like, you're already putting them in these high risk. They're born with drugs in their system. Now, on the other end, I told CYFD, I'm like, hey, can you just give me some good cases where this has worked, where you've gotten them help? And I did get some examples where, this one mom, she had to carry a baby. She's like, I want my baby back. I'm going to get clean. She got help, and they were able to put the baby, and she's doing fine now. So I do want to bring up that there are these cases, but a lot of time it's just you're taking such a big risk with these parents who are on, cocaine or fentanyl, and putting the trust of trying to raise a baby when you're doing those kind of drugs, and making sure that those babies are going to be safe when they do get put back with those families.
I know we mentioned this at the top, but I mean, really, even the governor has agreed that CYFD is not doing its job, right, to protect children. She admitted that in that news conference there in February 2023. A few months ago, you also had the chance to interview the secretary of CYFD right now, and for the last couple years has been Teresa Casados. The headline from that story was that she agreed that the department has its shortcomings, but what did you learn from speaking with her? How does she feel? How does she see this problem?
And she knows she's like, it's really difficult for my workers and to recruit because they're constantly under scrutiny. They're constantly getting beat up. Nothing ever, CYFD is just, constant headlines. Nothing good ever comes out of that. And so she's like, I have a hard time recruiting. I know it's short staffed, and she's trying to get them better trained in these situations. And on that end too, I feel for them because who wants to go work for an agency? One, you're dealing with what you're seeing is some of the worst child abuse cases, and no one wants to have to see that with these children. And then doing that day in, day out on these different cases. And then knowing if you don't make the right choice, you could end up in a lawsuit. And so she's trying to get them trained. She's trying to get them the help that they need. I think she really took, and I told her, I'm like, hey, they really, like, lawmakers lit into her this year, and she had to take it. And she's like, and she was trying to come up with different ways of how do we fix this and solve this problem. And so, a lot of it's been administration after administration, and it's not just this one. We've gone through several CYFD secretaries just in this administration alone. We did in the prior as well. And so, my job is to keep staying on it and trying to figure out, like, how can we solve this? And I work with different, just getting background and details from different lawmakers, and what do you think works, and how do we get away from this, and how do we keep our kids safe?
Yeah. Did she see any point to, any fixes that she would like to see for her agency? I know it's a big agency. We're talking about the whole state.
Money. And so, money. There's also workers that aren't making a whole lot and doing some really tough work and trying to, they're short staffed and helping with recruitment, getting better training. I think all of that is, their focus and making sure that they're, when making it a little bit harder when determining when you keep a kid in there, involving supervisors to sign off on certain cases so that make sure we're getting different levels of people looking at these cases. And it's not just on one person.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like it or not, CYFD will soon face more scrutiny. I think your illustration of even the legislative hearing really did turn into a result by the end of the legislative session. A significant reform bill, one of the first that's really we've ever seen in a decade almost, actually passed and was signed by the governor. The legislature passed House Bill 5. It creates the Office of Child Advocate, which will be housed with the State Department of Justice under the Attorney General's control. They are, as I could understand, building this agency now. It is brand new. One of their big powers, though, will be the ability to take in and review complaints about CYFD. So you've got an outside agency for the first time within the government that will have the power to basically potentially intervene or raise the flag and say, this is a problem. Has anyone given you the impression that this is going to be significant in terms of turning the tide of addressing the issues here?
Absolutely. And I know that they're working right now on finding that person. There's committee meetings being held. They have one later this month that I've been following closely to see who they're going to pick. But I think this is a good turning point because you're going to have someone standing up for this kid from the outside, not saying, they're going to listen to grandparents. They're going to look at the whole case in itself instead of just doing what CYFD has to say. And this finally gives a voice to these children. And so I do think this is a good step in the right direction.
Do you get the sense that the Office of the Child Advocate will be more open or transparent with records when it comes to cases involving children?
I really hope so. We can't fix this problem if we're not showing what the problem is and where we're failing every time when we go to check on these cases. And I'll tell you, I've gone to the AG. I went under Hector Balderas asking for records and fighting with, trying to get any sort of records that had been blocked from me. I went to Raul Torres as well when he became the AG. So I've been trying my hardest to get my hands on these records and fighting back. And so I'm hoping that this will help shine a light and it'll help make it easier where we will be able to see. And that has been one of their biggest push, especially in the AG's office of saying, hey, we need to be showing what is going on. And Sarah Krucka brought up this great example saying, could you imagine if any other department, like tax and rev, if there was financial problems, or they didn't have to release anything they did, any of their policies, anything, if there were anything to have to do with their money, could you imagine? And she's like, think about with CYFD, why are we doing that with children where none of that is exposed and the public has no idea what's happening, and these are kids' lives involved.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see if, based on the Office of Child Advocate, whether or not there will be more interventions and just things that we know about before they turn into these sort of post-mortem cases where we're trying to piece together what happened after someone has died. I think that's really going to be the question here, is whether or not that will help address that situation.
And I hope, again, these decisions are, lawmakers are looking at every angle and trying to figure out, I just hope that they find a solution of really looking at each case and deciding, maybe having a higher standard of when we keep kids in those homes.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is beyond frustrating, heartbreaking to tell these stories like this over and over. I can feel my blood boiling when you talk about some of the issues just in this last case, to a point where I'm sure, a lot of people in our community might not want to hear or consume this news because it is so depressing and so heavy. What kind of toll does it take on you as a mom, as a journalist, and why do you feel like it's still so worth reading through those documents and reporting on?
It's so hard, especially the latest cases, because you see video stuff we'd never show on TV, and like seeing that just breaks your heart. Like, how in the world this poor child who doesn't deserve this and doesn't get to pick who your parents are or where, and that you get this life, and it's just devastating to see. And it's getting harder because we have all the videos now. We have more access to the videos, and seeing that stuff is just heartbreaking, which makes me want to do it even more, because we need to hold somebody accountable, and our children shouldn't be dying. Like, I don't understand like how we got here, and the only way we can grab attention is by showing these stories and really putting it out there. And when I put out some of my stories, I always put it out to like lawmakers and making sure they're seeing this and just where we are now. I mean, last week we had a baby whose mom's giving her Narcan, like a baby, a little 1-year-old. Like, that's where we are right now. Like, we have to keep exposing these stories until we don't have this many kids dying.
We appreciate your reporting and getting a chance to hear a little bit more about all of the work you do, and shining a light on a really important issue. So, Jessica Garate, thank you for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you for letting me come on and share the stories that we've been working on, and we'll stay on it. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Thanks again to Jessica Garate for that conversation and shedding light on, again, just really difficult subject matter to report on in New Mexico for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah, not only the difficulty of subject matter, but also just getting information, as I think Jessica made it clear, is one of the biggest challenges. But again, I think that we are seeing that the nature of how terrible things have gotten over the years has perhaps led to a point where there is more willingness to address this.
Certainly
publicly.
hope so.
Certainly.
Yeah. We will definitely keep you posted on Jessica's continued reporting, and, stay with us online at krqe.com as well to see some of the reporting that our colleagues have done about stories like this.
Certainly. And if you have an idea, let us know. I'm at chris.mckee at krqe.com, also at Chris McKee TV.
And I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart at krqe.com via email, and gburknm on social media. Thank you all for listening and watching.